Hey, what's going on? It's Joe Gilder here. I want to tell you 3 reasons, count them, 1, 2, 3, why I switched to the Series 3 StudioLive mixer from Presonus. Now, if you want to know why I use a mixer in general in a home studio, go check out that video where I talk about reasons why I love using a mixer in my home studio. This video is going to talk about why I switched from the classic version of the StudioLive, the original version 1, to this Series 3 mixer that you see before you. Reason number 1, moving faders. That's right. People have been asking Presonus for this for years, since the original StudioLive came out probably almost a decade ago. Great digital mixer, but it behaved a lot like an analog mixer, in that this first fader was always gonna be channel 1, and the faders themselves, while they were really nice, they didn't actually move and they weren't motorized. I remember I worked at Sweetwater when they released these mixers, and that was the biggest complaint we would get a lot of times. And we would tell customers, oh, but if they were motorized, it would be more expensive. Well, they figured out a way to make it work. Couple cool things about motorized faders. First of all, super simple, when you link 2 channels together, so let's say overhead left and right, now the faders follow each other. These first 2 channels over here are linked, so when I move them with one hand, if I move one fader, the other fader follows it around. It's kind of neat. But the bigger reason why I love moving faders is that once the faders can move and we're on a digital system, suddenly we unlock layers, which means I can have the faders, essentially a bunch of different virtual versions of this mixer, all kind of crammed into one, and I can see the different mixes at different times. What does that mean? For me in a home studio, that means I can have separate headphone mixes for all the different musicians in a tracking session, and each of those headphone mixes can have its own fader mix to it. That means, here's my mix for me in the control room. I hit one button, all the faders have gone down, they're all down at the bottom. Now I can set up a mix for the drummer. Boink. Then I can set up a mix for the bass player. And as I push this button, the faders jump from one mix to the next. And I can very quickly adjust the overall mix for the drummer using actual faders instead of using individual knobs. Then I can flip over and do the same for any other musician and then flip back to my mix. That's pretty cool. Reason number 2. I'll admit, the moving faders thing is a little gimmicky. You don't have to have that in a studio, right? Just like you don't have to have a mixer to make good music. However, this one's pretty cool. The fat channel on this board has been dramatically improved. On the original StudioLive, you had an EQ, a compressor, a gate, a limiter, high pass filter, and it was all right there. But it was all pretty generic, clean sounding. It didn't have a tone to it. It just was. It was very utilitarian and it worked. I usually only use them for kind of a live mixing scenario, but never really use them for getting tones that I wanted because I just didn't think they sounded all that great. They were okay, but I felt like I could get better sounds in the software than on the board. Well, that's all changed with the new fat channel. Because they've incorporated a touch screen that allows them to have a different user interface, but more importantly, they've actually incorporated different processors into the fat channel. Now you've got 3 different compressors to choose from and 3 different EQs. So you can pull up a Neve style analog EQ and an 1176 style compressor on the board on your tracks. It's like having plugins on a live mixer. Now, why is that helpful? Well, let's say I'm recording drums and the drummer's in there and I want to give him a really slamming awesome drum mix. Well, I can do that right here on the board. He's listening off the board anyway. Now I can give him, I can throw an 1176 on the snare drum and it'll just sound beefy and awesome, which is gonna sound better, which is gonna probably make him play better because he's hearing more of a finished mix than just the raw tracks. That's really fun and makes it's just a much more enjoyable experience for everybody. And as has always been the case with StudioLive mixers, I can print those effects to the recording, or we can just hear them and then record the raw, unprocessed audio, and then we can mess with that later. What's really cool about the fat channel on this board is it exactly matches the fat channel plugin inside of Studio One, which is the recording software developed by Presonus. The 2 communicate with each other. That means if I dial in a really sweet sound on my snare drum while recording, I can click a single button inside the software and it will then copy and sync up the settings between the fat channel in the software and the fat channel on the mixer. So I can save that awesome sound that I got into the recording session itself. So later when I'm mixing, I'm probably not gonna mix through this board. I'll probably mix in the software, but I have the same sound because I've got the exact same processing and plugins on both. That's dope. Reason number 3 why I switched to the Series 3 StudioLive mixer, Daw Mode is coming. Now, as of this video, which is coming out in fall 2017, the Daw mode for the StudioLive has not been released yet, but it is coming. What does that mean? Well, we've talked about this has moving faders. It's a digital system. We've already seen how it syncs up with Studio One. Very soon, it will be a full-on control surface. They'll just update the firmware, I'll update the mixer, and suddenly I've got a big honking control surface for Studio One, which means I can do more hands-on mixing without having to bus everything through the mixer and back into Studio One. The mixer goes from, with one push of a button, goes from being a mixer that is sending audio into the computer and transforms into a control surface, a big remote control for Studio One, and I believe it'll work for other DAWs as well. To me, that makes this suddenly a no-brainer for a home studio use. I understand if you don't think you need a mixer in your studio, but if you've been thinking about a control surface and you'd also like a mixer that gives you a bunch of mic inputs, yeah, it's pretty great. So there you go. I'm still very much new to the StudioLive Series 3. I've used it for about a month now, and I feel like I'm pretty confident with it, but I'm also fairly certain there is plenty for me to uncover as I dive in more and do more sessions on it. Big thanks to Presonus for supporting Home Studio Corner and this video series. There's a lot more to come. I'm gonna dive into this thing and really show you what it can do and how specifically I use it in a home studio environment to make music. That's it for me. See you in the next video. Later.